8 guests Johnny Carson hated so much they were banned for life. For 30 years, Johnny Carson didn't just end America's nights. He controlled them. 5 nights a week, millions tuned in not to be shocked, not to be shouted at, but to feel calm, comfortable. Johnny Carson wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He never begged for attention. And that's what made him dangerous. Because behind that warm smile and effortless charm was a power few people truly understood. Johnny Carson could make your career with a single glance, or erase you without saying a word. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. If you crossed an invisible line, you simply disappeared. No calls. No explanations. No second chances. Tonight we're revealing the 8 famous guests Johnny Carson despised so deeply that he banned them from The Tonight Show for life. And once that door closed, Hollywood followed. Joan Rivers, the daughter he erased. Johnny Carson never raised his voice when he was hurt. He went quiet. And that silence was where careers went to die. To understand why Joan Rivers' ban cut deeper than anyone else's, you have to understand one thing. She wasn't just a guest. She was family. When Joan Rivers first walked onto the Tonight Show stage, she wasn't a star. She was nervous, desperate to prove she belonged in a world that didn't make room for women who talked too fast, joked too hard, and refused to smile politely. Johnny Carson saw something different. He didn't just laugh at her jokes. He listened. Night after night, he brought her back. And again. And again. Then he did something no late-night host had ever done before. He gave her the chair. Not as a favor. As a statement. When Johnny Carson let Joan Rivers guest host The Tonight Show, he was telling America, "Trust her like you trust me." Behind the cameras, their bond deepened. Dinners. Long conversations. Creative brainstorming. Carson wasn't transactional. He didn't ask for loyalty contracts or silent obedience. What he gave Joan was rarer. Belief. And for Joan Rivers, Johnny wasn't just a mentor. He was the father figure the industry never gave her. Then came 1986. A phone call that could have changed everything. Fox wanted Joan Rivers to have her own late-night show. $10 million a year. Her name on the marquee. A chance to step out of Carson's shadow forever. There was just one problem. The show would air directly opposite The Tonight Show. Joan froze. How do you tell the man who built your career that you're about to become his competition? She waited. She hesitated. She told herself she'd explain it the right way. She never got the chance. Johnny Carson didn't hear it from her. He read it in the trades. The man who had given her everything found out from a headline. Carson didn't slam doors. He didn't curse. He didn't confront. He looked up quietly and said one sentence. "She didn't even call me." That was it. Joan Rivers ceased to exist in Johnny Carson's world. Her name was erased from archives. Clips disappeared. Guest hosts were warned not to mention her on air. One producer later said Johnny's order was chillingly simple. "She's dead to me." Joan tried everything. Private phone calls. Letters. Gifts. Messages sent through mutual friends. All returned. All unanswered. Silence. And in Carson's universe, silence was final. The professional fallout was brutal. NBC went cold. Producers stopped calling. Doors that once flew open quietly locked. Joan Rivers lost more than a show. She lost the man whose approval had protected her in a ruthless industry. Years later, she rebuilt herself through stand-up, fashion commentary, sheer relentless force of will. But the wound never healed. Decades later, even at the height of her comeback, Joan would choke up when Johnny's name was mentioned. "He gave me my career," she said, "and I hurt him." She wouldn't return to The Tonight Show until 2014, 22 years after Carson retired, 9 years after he died. By then, forgiveness didn't matter. The silence had already done its damage. Joan Rivers' story isn't about ambition. It's about timing. About one conversation that never happened. About how power doesn't always roar. It simply stops answering the phone. For Johnny Carson, this was the deepest betrayal. And for Joan Rivers, it was the heartbreak that followed her for the rest of her life. Sometimes the most devastating consequences aren't caused by cruelty, but by silence, pride, and a single moment where someone waits too long to speak. Wayne Newton, the threat that crossed the line. If Joan Rivers broke Johnny Carson's heart, Wayne Newton challenged his authority. And in Johnny Carson's world, that was unforgivable. By the late 1970s, Wayne Newton was everywhere. Las Vegas royalty. Perfect smile. Perfect hair. A voice that never aged and a persona built on charm, polish, and control. To the public, Wayne Newton was untouchable. To Johnny Carson, he was material. Night after night, Carson slipped Wayne's name into monologues. Not vicious jokes. Not attacks. Just enough. Enough to tease the eternal youth. Enough to poke at the glitter. Enough to suggest something off-script beneath the surface. At first, Newton laughed along. That was the rule. Late-night comedy wasn't personal. Until it was. Over time, the jokes began to stack. Not loud. Not cruel. But suggestive. Whispers about image. About masculinity. About things Carson never stated outright, but never denied either. For a performer whose entire career depended on perception, those jokes landed like slow poison. Wayne Newton didn't complain publicly. He didn't call a publicist. He didn't ask for a meeting. In 1980, he decided to handle it himself. He showed up, unannounced. Dressed for performance, not discussion, Wayne Newton walked past NBC security and straight into Johnny Carson's office. No invitation. No buffer. Just presence. Carson looked up from his desk, surprised, but calm. That calm didn't last. Newton stood over him and delivered the sentence that ended everything. You can make fun of my music. You can make fun of my hair. But if you ever joke about my sexuality again, I'll kick your ass. The room froze. Johnny Carson did not do threats. He stood slowly, measured every word, and replied coldly, "Get out of my office before I have you thrown out." No shouting. No escalation. Just finality. That afternoon, Carson issued a directive so quiet it barely registered. Wayne Newton was never to be booked again. Not this week. Not next season. Not ever. No public announcement followed. No feud played out in the tabloids. Wayne Newton simply vanished from The Tonight Show. And in that era, disappearing from Carson's couch meant disappearing from America's living room. Newton remained a Vegas legend, but the national spotlight dimmed. Fewer interviews, fewer primetime moments. A clear, invisible wall between him and the most powerful stage in television. Years later, Newton would reflect on the incident without apology. "I'd do it again," he said. "Some things are worth standing up for." And maybe he was right, but Johnny Carson never saw it that way. To Carson, this wasn't about jokes. It wasn't about fairness. It was about boundaries. You could criticize him. You could parody him. You could even fail on his stage. But you could not walk into his house and threaten him. Carson believed respect should never be demanded with fists. The moment Wayne Newton crossed that line, the door closed forever. Power doesn't always belong to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the person who decides, who never gets invited back. Wayne Newton chose confrontation. Johnny Carson chose silence. Only one of those choices lasted. Charles Grodin, the joke that broke the spell. Johnny Carson loved control. Not domination, rhythm. Conversation was music to him. Timing mattered. Trust mattered. Charles Grodin didn't play the music. He disrupted it. From his first appearance on The Tonight Show, Charles Grodin was different. No polished charm. No rehearsed anecdotes. No eager gratitude. He arrived irritated, defensive, awkward, and it was deliberate. Grodin's entire persona was built on tension, answering questions sideways, pushing back, refusing to play the grateful Hollywood guest. The audience leaned forward. Was this real? Was he serious? Was he attacking Johnny Carson or performing? Johnny smiled. At first, he loved it. Carson was a master improviser. He understood comedy as chess, not checkers. He saw what Grodin was doing. A character, a controlled rebellion, a strange new flavor of humor. It made the couch crackle. Each appearance escalated. The pauses grew longer, the jabs sharper, the discomfort thicker. Carson allowed it. Until one night, the performance stopped feeling like a game. Grodin began questioning Carson himself. On air, suggesting Johnny didn't read the books of his guests, didn't listen, didn't care, that he was just going through the motions. It was satire, but satire cuts best when it touches something real. Johnny Carson was many things: aloof, guarded, emotionally distant. But he was never lazy, and he never disrespected the audience. Then came 1990, a late appearance, a colder energy. Grodin leaned in harder than ever. He mocked Carson's delivery. His emotional distance implied the man behind the desk was hollow. The audience laughed, nervously. Johnny smiled, tightly. Those closest to him noticed it instantly. The eyes narrowed. The rhythm broke. The joke landed and stayed. Carson didn't respond. He didn't defend himself. He didn't counterpunch. When the segment ended and the cameras cut to commercial, he turned to his producer and said quietly, "We're done with that." That was all. No memo. No blacklist. No announcement. Just silence. When Grodin's publicists called to book another appearance, they were met with soft refusals. Not a good week. Schedule's full. Maybe later. Later never came. Inside the studio, everyone knew the truth. Johnny Carson had closed the door. Years afterward, Grodin admitted it himself. "I thought I was doing Andy Kaufman," he said. But Johnny didn't find it funny. And that was the point. Carson understood Kaufman. What he didn't tolerate was a joke that undermined the sacred contract between host and audience. The Tonight Show wasn't a battleground. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't a place to expose the man behind the curtain. It was a shared moment. Break that spell and you were done. Charles Grodin didn't insult Johnny Carson. He questioned the sincerity of the entire performance. And for a man who built his empire on trust and timing, that was worse than an insult. Comedy thrives on tension, but it survives on trust. Once the audience is forced to wonder whether the laughter is cruel instead of playful, the magic collapses. Charles Grodin pushed the joke one beat too far. Johnny Carson never laughed again. Shelley Winters, the moment that shattered the contract. Johnny Carson believed there was an unspoken contract between host and guest. You could be messy. You could be emotional. You could even fail. But you could not humiliate the stage. Shelley Winters did. Shelley Winters wasn't a nobody. She was Hollywood royalty. Two-time Academy Award winner. A force of nature. A woman who had survived decades in an industry that devoured people like her. When Shelley walked onto The Tonight Show, she didn't need validation. She brought stories. Wild, sprawling, unforgettable tales from old Hollywood. When she was on, the show crackled. But by the 1970s, something had changed. The brilliance was still there, but so was the unpredictability. Producers whispered. Sometimes Shelley arrived sharp and focused. Sometimes she arrived altered, unfocused, unstable, carrying the weight of too many drinks and too many regrets. Booking her became a gamble. Which Shelley would walk on stage tonight? Johnny Carson knew the risk. He booked her anyway. That was Carson. The night everything ended began like any other. Shelley took her seat, drink in hand, smiling, commanding the room. The first, it worked. She told stories. The audience laughed. But Johnny noticed the cracks. Sentences wandered. Thoughts drifted. Timing slipped. Still he adjusted. He always did. Then Johnny made a joke. A light one. About Shelley's weight, a topic she herself had joked about countless times before. For Carson, it was routine. For Shelley, that night, it was a spark in a room filled with gasoline. Without warning, Shelley snapped. She lifted her glass. Whiskey. Glass. And threw it directly into Johnny Carson's face. The audience gasped. The cameras froze for a beat too long. Johnny sat there drenched, stunned. Then, professional as ever, he cut to commercial. Behind the curtain, the show ended. Not the taping. The relationship. Johnny Carson left the stage soaked and silent. His face, calm, controlled, but behind it, a fury no one had ever seen. Shelley was escorted out during the break. She never returned. There were no negotiations. No second chances. Carson's instruction to his staff was clear and absolute. She is never to be invited back. Ever. This wasn't about anger. It was about betrayal. In Johnny Carson's world, the stage was sacred, the place shared with millions. To turn it into chaos, to physically humiliate the host, wasn't just unprofessional. It was unforgivable. The fallout was swift. Shelley's career was already slowing. But losing The Tonight Show meant losing one of her last national platforms. To a generation of viewers, Shelley Winters simply vanished. Years later, she spoke about the incident without excuses. "I was in a bad place," she said. "Johnny had every right to never want to see me again." And she was right. Johnny Carson didn't punish Shelley Winters to protect his ego. He did it to protect the contract. The silent agreement that said, "This stage is not about you. It's about the moment we create together." Once that trust is broken, no amount of fame can restore it. Some mistakes don't destroy careers because they're loud. They destroy them because they violate something sacred. Shelley Winters crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And Johnny Carson never pretended otherwise. Rich Little, when laughter stops evolving. Not every band began with betrayal. Not every door closed with a slam. Some just stopped opening. That was Rich Little's story. For years, Rich Little was a guaranteed laugh. A human jukebox of voices. Nixon, Stewart, Carson himself. When Rich Little sat on the Tonight Show couch, the audience leaned in, waiting to recognize the voice before the punchline landed. Johnny Carson loved it. At first, between the 1960s and 1970s, Rich Little appeared more than 30 times. He was safe, reliable, a proven crowd pleaser. But Johnny Carson didn't value safety. He valued growth. Behind the scenes, something began to wear on him. Rich Little never turned it off. In rehearsals, in the green room, between takes, the impressions kept coming. What felt electric for 5 minutes on camera became exhausting over hours off it. Carson noticed, and Johnny Carson noticed everything. Then came the repetition. Same voices, same rhythms, same jokes, slightly rearranged, barely refreshed. For most audiences, it didn't matter. For Carson, it was fatal. He had an almost photographic memory for comedy. He knew when a laugh was recycled. One afternoon, after another rehearsal filled with non-stop impressions, Carson leaned to a producer and muttered, "Does he even have a real voice?" It wasn't cruel. It was disappointed. Carson believed that regular guests had an obligation to evolve, to surprise, to bring something new every time they stepped onto that stage. Coasting on yesterday's applause wasn't harmless. It was disrespectful. There was no confrontation, no explanation. One day, the invitation simply stopped. When Rich Little's team called, they were met with polite fog. "We're going in a different direction. Schedule's full." Nothing dramatic. Nothing final. Just nothing. Rich Little waited. Weeks passed. The months. He assumed the call would come. It never did. Only years later did he learn the truth. Johnny Carson hadn't been angry. He had been done. Rich Little would later admit he never fully understood what happened. "I kept waiting for the call," he said. "It just never came." And that was the lesson. In Johnny Carson's world, you didn't always lose your place by doing something wrong. Sometimes you lost it by failing to grow, by becoming predictable, by forgetting that the audience and the host expected more. Rich Little didn't fall. He faded. And in late-night television, fading was worse than failing. Talent gets you noticed. Consistency keeps you booked. But growth is what keeps the door open. Rich Little kept the laughter alive. He just stopped evolving it. And Johnny Carson quietly moved on. Truman Capote, when genius collapses in the light. Johnny Carson could forgive arrogance. He could forgive awkwardness. He could even forgive failure. What he couldn't forgive was watching someone destroy themselves on his stage. Truman Capote was brilliance in human form. The voice, the wit, the razor-sharp intelligence wrapped in eccentric charm. When Capote appeared on The Tonight Show, audiences didn't just watch. They listened. He wasn't there to promote a book. He was the performance. By the mid-1970s, however, the sparkle had dulled. Alcohol, addiction, isolation, the qualities that once made Capote mesmerizing, began to unravel him instead. Still, Johnny Carson hoped. He booked Capote in 1975 believing, maybe praying, that the old Truman would show up. The moment Capote walked on stage, Carson knew something was wrong. His steps were unsteady, his eyes unfocused, his words already trailing before they began. Carson adjusted immediately. Shorter questions, gentler pacing, more space. He was hosting and quietly triaging at the same time. Nothing worked. Capote slurred his words, lost his train of thought, stared into the lights as if trying to remember where he was. Then came the stories. Explicit, rambling, inappropriate for network television. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Johnny Carson made a decision in real time. He cut to commercial early. During the break, Carson leaned in, voice low and firm. "Truman, you're not well tonight. We're going to end it here." Capote tried to protest. The slurring answered for him. The segment, scheduled for 10 minutes, ended in 4. Carson didn't shame him. He didn't joke about it. He protected the show. And in a strange way, he protected Truman. Afterward, Carson made his choice. Truman Capote would never be invited back. Not as punishment, as preservation. Losing The Tonight Show was devastating. It was one of Capote's last major bridges to the public. And once it was gone, his cultural presence faded quickly. His career never recovered. Johnny Carson didn't ban Truman Capote out of anger. He did it out of sorrow. He believed The Tonight Show was not a place to showcase a man's collapse. It was a place for connection, not exposure. In Carson's world, dignity mattered. And when dignity was no longer possible on stage, the kindest thing he could do was close the door. Not every ban is about control. Some are about compassion disguised as finality. Truman Capote didn't lose Johnny Carson's favor. He lost himself. And Johnny Carson refused to let millions watch it happen again. The Smothers Brothers, when politics entered the sanctuary. Johnny Carson never pretended comedy was harmless. But he believed something sacred. Late night was a refuge. A place where Americans, divided, angry, exhausted, could sit down together and breathe. The Smothers Brothers didn't believe in refuge. They believed in confrontation. By the late 1960s, Tom and Dick Smothers were more than comedians. They were cultural lightning rods. Their humor was sharp, political, unapologetic. Their CBS variety show pushed boundaries, challenging the Vietnam War, authority, and the rules of television itself. Johnny Carson respected them, but he didn't trust them. Carson's philosophy was clear. You could joke about politics. You could poke at power, but you could not let politics become the show. The Tonight Show was not a battlefield. It was neutral ground. The tension simmered quietly for years. Then came 1970. A routine appearance. A light segment, on paper. Halfway through, Tom Smothers veered off script. What began as humor turned into pointed commentary. Authority. Moral outrage. The studio changed instantly. The laughter thinned. The room tightened. Johnny Carson's face didn't flinch, but his eyes hardened. He finished the segment professionally. Boys. Backstage, Carson delivered the verdict without drama. Too much trouble for what we get. No ban was announced. No doors were slammed. They just stopped calling. When the Smothers Brothers' names came up in booking meetings, the response was consistent. Not right for the show. Too risky. Too divisive. And when they were invited, it came with conditions. No politics. No surprises. Music only. To the Smothers Brothers, it felt like censorship. To Carson, it was protection. He wasn't rejecting their beliefs. He was rejecting their method. Johnny Carson believed entertainment should unify before it challenged, that laughter should lower defenses, not raise them, and that once a stage becomes ideological, half the audience stops listening. The Smothers Brothers never disappeared, but their relationship with The Tonight Show cooled permanently. Their absence became a quiet signal. There were lines you could cross elsewhere, just not here. Johnny Carson didn't fear politics. He feared losing the sanctuary he had built. 30 minutes a night where America didn't have to choose sides. Where laughter wasn't weaponized. Every platform has a purpose. When you ignore that purpose, even truth can sound like noise. The Smothers Brothers spoke their convictions. Johnny Carson protected his stage. Neither was wrong, but only one controlled the door. Morton Downey Jr. The circus Johnny refused to host. By the late 1980s, television was changing. Louder, angrier, hungry for conflict. And Morton Downey Jr. was its loudest symbol. Downey's syndicated talk show was chaos by design. Shouting, smoke curling through studio lights. Guests weren't interviewed, they were attacked. For some viewers, it felt raw, honest, revolutionary. For Johnny Carson, it felt like the end of something sacred. When Downey was booked on The Tonight Show in 1988, Carson was hesitant. But he agreed. Not to endorse him, to understand him. What followed was a collision, not a conversation. Downey didn't sit when invited. He paced. He soaked in applause like a prizefighter. He interrupted Carson's questions, talked over him, and addressed the audience as if this were his show. Johnny Carson didn't interrupt. He watched, measured, pulled back. Then Downey crossed the final line. He began attacking other talk show hosts by name. Cowards, frauds, afraid to speak truth. The implication wasn't subtle. Carson leaned back in his chair, a movement longtime crew members recognized instantly. The interview was over. Johnny finished the segment politely. Boys. Backstage, the verdict came fast. This isn't television, Carson reportedly said. That's a circus. Morton Downey Jr. would never be invited back. This ban wasn't personal. It was philosophical. Downey represented a future Carson didn't believe in. A future where volume replaced thought. Where spectacle replaced substance. Where conflict replaced connection. Johnny Carson didn't resist change. He resisted noise. He believed conversation was an art. That listening mattered. And that once a host surrendered control to chaos, the audience lost something they couldn't name, but could feel. Downey's star burned bright and fast. The style he embodied eventually consumed itself. Johnny Carson watched from a distance, unmoved. When Carson retired in 1992, he didn't stage a farewell tour. He didn't demand applause. He did what he'd always done. He exited quietly. And that is where the story ends. Not with a ban, but with a question. Was Johnny Carson a benevolent legend, or a quiet tyrant? The answer lives somewhere in between. He ruled an empire without shouting, ended careers without arguments, and enforced standards without ever explaining them. His power wasn't loud. It was absolute. And once the door closed, it never reopened. In a world that grows louder every year, Johnny Carson reminds us of something radical. Silence can still hold power. Standards still matter. And not every stage is meant to host chaos. Johnny Carson never told the world who he banned. He never explained himself. He just stopped opening the door. So now the question is yours. Were these bans acts of cruelty or acts of principle? Which guest do you think crossed the line? And which one deserved a second chance? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe standards still matter in a world that keeps getting louder, subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than noise.